Thanks for coming. Just some housekeeping things to get out of the way, just because the hybrid program format is a little new to all of us. So tonight we're using a hybrid format. So that means that we have attendees viewing both in person and online. The session will also be recorded and put up on YouTube. So if you miss anything or if you want to show your neighbors, feel free. If you're watching from home, know that we are using the webinar format. That means that you can see and hear us, but we cannot see and hear you. We'll have question and answer segments throughout the presentation. If you're watching on Zoom, you can submit your questions at any time by entering them into the Q&A feature. You can find this on your Zoom toolbar by clicking on the button that looks like two speech bubbles. If you don't see this button, click on More or the button with the three dots. For those of you in person with us, just feel free to raise your hand when you have a question. In general, if you have a question that's really specific to you, it might be better to hold it till the end. But if you have a more general question that's helpful to everybody, it's great to ask it throughout the presentation. On Zoom, we have the live transcript option enabled. If you'd like to disable the words at the bottom of your screen, click on the closed captioning button. If you don't see the button with CC, click on More or the button with three dots and then select Hide Subtitles. In the library, we have our assisted listening system. If you'd like to borrow one of these devices, please ask staff at the back of the room. So if you're having any trouble hearing, it's just at the back of the room. We've got the little packets and they're super easy to use. And to turn them on, just press the power button and then you can adjust the volume using the up and down arrows. Additionally, we'd like to remind everyone that in the library, you're required to wear a mask and keep it on. And please also just silence your cell phone and other devices. If you do need to take a call, you can just step right outside. Bathrooms are located down the hallway near the parking lot entrance on your left, so right near where you came in. And if you need to leave the room at any point during the presentation, please just try to do so without disturbing your neighbors and then check to make sure the door closes. And let's see. Oh, and for those of you in person, the people on Zoom are not able to hear you if you talk. They can only hear you if you have a microphone. So how would you prefer to do it? Do you want to just restate their question? Sure. Or because I know people don't love it when, I come running at you with a microphone. So it might be chiller for everyone if Marti just rereads or resays the question and then answers it.
And just remind me if I forget.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I can always, for the Zoom questions, I'll just be reading them aloud from the back. And then while we do our best to answer all questions, please understand that we do have a limited amount of time. So if we do get a lot of questions, we might have to pare it down a little, but I don't anticipate that should be an issue. And just wanted to let you guys know also about a couple of other programs we've got coming up. So on December 2nd at 7 p.m., we've got a Chicago genealogy program coming up. So it's similar to this and it's got that local interest. That one's going to be a hybrid as well. So you're welcome to attend in person or online. And then on December 6th at 7 p.m., we have another hybrid program, Accessorizing Your Home. And that one's going to be all about, interior decorating and, tips to make your home pop. So without further ado, let me introduce Marti Deuter. She's the Ward 1 Alderman here in Elmhurst, and she's here tonight to tell us more about how city government works.
Thank you. Yes, good evening, everyone. Thanks to folks who are here in person and thanks to folks who are joining virtually via Zoom. I'm talking about one of my favorite topics tonight, so I truly was tickled to get the invitation. I hear it came just because I'm the first Ward Alderman, which includes the library, but feels like an extra privilege to me. So I'm really happy to be here tonight. I am in the start of my third term as an alderman here in Elmhurst. That means I'm beginning my 9th year. I've lived in Elmhurst for 13 years. Before that, I was living in Chicago. I moved to Elmhurst after I got married. My husband had 3 kids and they were all settled here. When I was in Chicago for 8 of the last 12 years that I was there, I was working for the city of Chicago. So I've got a background in municipal government. I truly love. I was intrigued by local government as soon as I started working for the city of Chicago, and I've been thrilled to continue to be involved in local government here in Elmhurst. So just a quick overview of what I hope to run through tonight. I'm going to talk about the city of Elmhurst and its governance. Talk about the elected officials who serve the city, how our city council meetings work, how our committee meetings work, our referral process, which is really what takes an issue through city council to approval or to some resolution, and a couple of points about our city boards and commissions, which is a great way to get involved. Most importantly, I am here tonight for you, for the folks online and the folks in the room. I assume you're tuned in because you're curious about something. There's something you'd really like to get to know. So most importantly, I really want to make sure that you walk away with your questions answered. So if it's, if you know already what you're hoping to get out of this, just jot it down, make sure that we get to it before you walk out. And as Alyssa said, as I walk through things, feel free to raise your hand or send in a question via Zoom. We'll try and answer some of those as we go, if it's related to what we're presenting. I'm going to run through things and there will be time for questions at the end. So I'm happy to really try and answer any question that you may have about what I've talked about or anything else you can think of related to the city and how it works here in Elmhurst. So the city of Elmhurst was incorporated in 1882. The city is governed by a mayor and 14 aldermen. I will just add a note that 14 is an unusually large size of city council. Typically, a city our size would have between 5 and 9 representatives, either on their board of trustees or on their council. So we have an unusually large council here in Elmhurst. The city is divided into 7 wards. So there are 2 aldermen that are assigned and elected from each ward. The ward boundaries are drawn so that the 7 wards have equal population as much as possible. So we look at those boundaries after every census. We'll be doing that again probably early next year. When the boundaries shift, they tend to be very subtle shifts. So if you know what ward you're in now, the overwhelming likelihood is that you continue to stay in that ward. It's kind of 1 block here or 1 block there, very subtle shift as needed. The city of Elmhurst operates under a city manager form of government. So the elected officials all serve on a part-time basis. The day-to-day operations of the city are run by an outstanding city staff. They are full-time, they are trained and experts in what they do. And speaking of that city staff, I did want to give a note of thanks to the staff who helped to prepare this presentation. It was something that was pulled together originally a few years back. Our then mayor, Steve Morley, asked for this to be pulled together, recognizing how important this information is, and that for folks to really be able to effectively get involved in what their local government is doing, this is really helpful information. So thanks to our outstanding city staff for pulling this together, and I just made a few tweaks of it to be available for us tonight. So I caught most of the people in the room to make sure people know which ward they live in. But if you aren't sure which ward you live in, you can use this website, which is put out there by DuPage County. I believe their Board of Elections. Folks at home can put in that website, dupageco.org/district lookup. You can put in your address, and that will provide a list of all your elected officials from the federal offices down to the local offices. It's a valuable resource. So moving straight into the city of Elmhurst. The elected officials are a mayor, a city clerk, a city treasurer, and as I mentioned, the 14 aldermen. All of those elected officials serve for 4-year terms. There's a municipal election, and the one we had this past April was the election for the mayor, the city clerk, and the city treasurer. They all run on kind of the same cycle. And then every 2 years, half of the aldermen are elected. So this past election, you would have had an opportunity to elect one of your aldermen. 2 years from now, you'll have the opportunity to elect the other alderman that serves your ward. There are a couple of exceptions to that, but typically you can expect to have the opportunity to vote on an alderman every 2 years. So I mentioned our staff at City Hall. At the top of that staff is a city manager. Our current city manager is Jim Grabowski. We have an assistant city manager, that's Mike Kopp. The rest of the senior staff at City Hall includes the Director of Finance, Fire Chief, Police Chief, the Director of Public Works, and the Director of our History Museum. Folks may not realize that here in Elmhurst, the History Museum is actually a city department. So it falls under the umbrella of city government. And then just back to the one more point on the officials who are elected, all of the local, all of those offices, the mayor, city clerk, city treasurer, and the alderman, we are all elected on a nonpartisan basis. So the Republican Democrats, doesn't factor into our elections. We run nonpartisan, which really reflects the nature of the work we do, which is not, on this side or on that side. It's clean water, streets that are drivable, public safety, lots of issues that are really just basic provision of city services. So folks here in the room might have trouble seeing this. Hopefully folks at home can get a better view. But this is the city's org chart. So the city has about 250 full-time employees. And backing up, I'm going to run through the primary functions of the city. But what is not included, what you will not hear, is anything related to the parks or the schools. So in the city of Elmhurst, we have an independently elected school board. We have an independently elected park board. They each have their own taxing authority. They are completely separate governmental entities. So the city has no authority over parks and schools. We do have our primary functions that include public safety. So that's primarily police and fire, public works. So you think about our streets, our water delivery and treatment systems, stormwater management. A note on public works, we heard this at a city council meeting last night, and I pulled the facts. In the city of Elmhurst, we have 160 miles of streets, 175 miles of water main, and 23,000 parkway trees. So the Public Works Department really is responsible for maintaining the city assets, which includes those pieces I just mentioned and many more, of course, all of our public buildings as well. Another primary responsibility of the city is our community development area. So that's zoning and land use, our planning, issuing building permits, and economic development. And then the other piece of that is, of course, the History Museum. So what is City Council? Our City Council is our legislative and policy-making body. One of the pieces that we do every year is we approve the budget, which is our spending plan for the upcoming year. The budget is a good place to dig in to really understand what the priorities are of the city, right? What do we spend our money on? The City Council also determines the tax rate. So we set the property tax levy every year. For folks who have looked line by line at the property tax bill when you receive it, there are a few lines that are related to the city. The city's portion is a fairly small portion of the tax bill. The biggest portion of the tax bill is the schools, the levy for the schools. That said, the tax levy is still a significant source of revenue for the city. The biggest one is actually the sales tax revenue. But both of those combined are super important sources of revenue for the city. City Council also sets the goals and the priorities for the city going forward. One really important tool in that is our strategic plan. I mentioned our current city manager is Jim Grabowski. And he has a pretty tough job. If you think of his job as having 15 bosses, right? The mayor and the 14 aldermen on any given day, it's probably not uncommon for a number of us to call Jim and tell him about the latest idea that we have, or what we heard this other community is doing, or the great idea that we heard from a resident. So Jim really, I think on a fairly regular basis, is getting lots of input from people who in theory are his bosses. So not long after he came to the city, he initiated a process of strategic planning. The first one was done in 2015. We did a small update to that plan in 2018. And then we're about to start a new strategic plan early next year. It's a great time for it. We have a new mayor, was elected this past spring. And we have 6 of our 14 aldermen who are relatively new to the council. So it's a great time to really look at what the strategic priorities of the city should be. And then that really becomes the roadmap for Jim Grabowski to keep the city moving in the right direction as determined by the strategic plan. So it's, I think, especially because of our large council, the strategic plan is really a critical document for what activities the city undertakes in the coming years. And keep posted for that. There will be an opportunity for public comment as we develop that next strategic plan. So the individual offices. Our current mayor is Scott Levin. He was elected this past April. He served as an alderman for 10 years before that. One of the things that changes when you become mayor is that you stop voting on all the day-to-day issues that come to council, right? The mayor presides over all of the council meetings, but only votes in the case of a tie. So he has much more of in a leadership position, right? He's the outside face of the city, the public face of the city. So he's interacting with our neighboring communities, our other governmental entities. And he also has an important role in appointing all of the volunteers who serve on the city's boards and commissions. He also assigns the aldermen to our committees. We'll talk quite a bit more about the committee structure in a minute. I mentioned all these elected positions are part-time jobs. We put in a lot of time, but you can see by the compensation, they are not designed to be full-time jobs. So the governor or the mayor's compensation on an annual basis is $8,400. So another position that's elected every 4 years is the city clerk. Current city clerk is Jackie Tamer. She was appointed by Steve Morley to fill a vacant position, and she was elected this past April to a 4-year term. So her direct responsibilities are to maintain a complete and permanent history of actions taken by the city council. She publishes and attests to all resolutions and ordinances. So she's at all of our meetings. She does a lot of this work herself, but she is supported in her role by a full-time staff person who works at City Hall and has the title of deputy clerk. So she's responsible for all that work that gets done, but a lot of it on a day-to-day basis is really done by the city staff person. And her compensation is the same as the mayor's, $8,400 a year. Our city treasurer has another oversight role. Current city treasurer is Dan Curran. He was elected this past April as a write-in candidate. He has responsibility for the custody of all city funds and the disbursement of those funds. Again, oversight role, the day-to-day responsibilities of managing the city's dollars are all done by our finance department, our full-time city staff. And then moving into the position that I know best, the role of alderman. So, you know, I often say that this position is kind of equal parts policymaking, problem solving, and customer service. We hear from residents on a fairly regular basis, and it can be anything from troubleshooting an issue, lodging a complaint, trying to get a response from city staff, and they haven't been able to either connect with the right person or get a response back from that person. So we do a lot of facilitating between the residents and City Hall. And then if there are issues that need to be raised, then we hear that input too, and we'll flag an issue for consideration by council. When it comes to, you know, if folks have been in Chicago or followed, you know, how government might work in Chicago, we're different in lots of ways, of course. But one big way is that in Chicago, the aldermen have a fair amount of responsibility for what happens in their ward. Certain things don't happen unless the alderman gives his or her approval. In that case, we're completely different. There is really, I have no more authority over city services that are provided in the ward, approvals for anything any activity that's happening within the ward. I have no more authority over my ward than I do any other part of the city. So we really, our decisions are meant to and our authority is very broad. We operate citywide. The piece that really affects, your ward is that constituent service piece, right? So I think when it comes to input from residents, which I believe all the aldermen value quite a bit, we are programmed to be the most tuned into the input from residents. If there's a high profile issue, we will often get input from residents throughout the city. If it's something people care about, they will contact all of us often. I think most of us make a point to respond and engage with the residents within our ward. We value the input from everyone, but in terms of engaging and really establishing back and forth communication, that's where we tune into, who are our constituents, who lives within our ward. Annual compensation of the alderman and the treasurer, I think I forgot to mention, is $2,400. Talked a little bit about that communication, and someone asked earlier the best ways to reach your alderman. You can do it by email, you can do it by phone. If you don't have a direct email, you can find through the city's website, which is elmhurst.org. There is an opportunity to send an email to any elected official or to city staff as well. And it's filling out a form, but it's sent via email directly to us. And in that form, you fill out your email address and your phone number if you want to. And that is what, that's the information we use to respond. All the elected officials have their phone numbers listed on the city website. And there's a whole list of the aldermen, of course, as well on the city website.
Do you mind if I interrupt just for a sec to ask some of the Zoom questions?
Sure, yeah.
Back issue. Sorry. Oh, no, I didn't. All right. So the first question from someone on Zoom is about how much time do the city council members spend on their duties for the city?
That's a great question. The required time commitment is Monday nights. We have meetings essentially every Monday night. They range in length from 2 to 3 hours. So that is at a minimum. You attend and you participate in those meetings. To prepare for those meetings, it's usually at least a couple hours of preparation. There's a fair amount of material that we receive in advance that is important to be reviewed so that we're prepared for a productive discussion. And then, as I mentioned, we hear from residents who, may want to meet to talk about an issue, may just be responding to phone calls and emails. I'd say a typical week is probably about 10 hours a week, all in. It can vary, right? If there's something going on or you're out of town, it's going to be less. Weeks like this one, we had our council meeting last night. I'm here tonight, which I'm thrilled to be here. And then our board, my counterpart, Alderman Varinas, and I are having our board meeting this Thursday. So this is a week, it's going to be a little bit more time. So it really varies. It can be as much time, it will take up as much time as you're willing to give it. But I'd say typical is probably about 10 hours a week. It's a great question.
All right, and then one more question from Zoom. Oh, good, I'm not getting feedback this time. You mentioned earlier that council focuses on community's goals. Who determines those goals, and then how are those goals determined?
That's a great question. So the spending plan, so the budget, I mentioned that's one way where you can identify what the priorities are of the city. The budget is initially formulated by city staff, often using the previous year's spending plan as a guide and adjusting as needed. So it starts with city staff, and then that proposed budget comes to the council for truly a line by line review. Usually starting, let's see, what week are we in? Usually starting middle toward the end of October. We meet every Monday as a council of the whole, committee of the whole, to review each section of the budget. So we're going through that process now. That's one way that we can adjust the priorities that are identified in the budget. And then I mentioned the strategic plan. That really becomes the critical piece of what does the city focus on going forward. So our last strategic plan, stormwater was a big issue. Our downtown area was a big issue. Those are the two that stand out the most. And those were areas that the city made a significant amount of progress on in the last handful of years. So I think the other part of the question was, how do those priorities get identified? So that will be those strategic planning sessions involve the elected officials and city staff. There will be an opportunity for public comment prior to those sessions beginning. Last time around, going back to 2015, there were a series of focus groups that were held with different kind of constituencies in the public, where they were brought together in small groups. They generated kind of what they saw as the important issues going forward. And then that input was gathered, summarized, presented to council. And that's kind of where we started our strategic planning sessions, was with that input from the public. I hope that answers those questions. And then, certainly issues can come up over time, but as I mentioned, what's in the strategic plan really becomes the basis for the city's activities for the coming years. So critically important what's in the content of the strategic plan. And I think I saw a hand here. Do you have a question? Yes. They are absolutely open to the public. The meetings all take place at City Hall. And I'll talk a little bit more about the types of meetings. We meet as a full council 2 Mondays a month, and we meet as committees the other 2 Mondays a month. Depending on which night it is, it typically starts at either 7 o'clock or 7:30, and they are all open to the public. The public is encouraged to attend and participate and offer their comment. Say that one. Meeting every Monday. Correct, yes. So the question was, are meetings open to the public? And the answer, and I'll talk a little bit more about the Open Meetings Act, which is a state statute that really guides the standards that we use for our public meetings. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but the public is absolutely encouraged to attend and available, welcome to attend. So I talked about how you can reach your alderman. Here's a little bit more about the opportunities for communication from the city. When I was first elected, so 8.5 years ago, I was shocked that the city did not have a full-time person who was responsible for its communications. At the time, I think the primary tool that was used for communicating with residents was the Front Porch newsletter, which comes out on a quarterly basis, and it is a fantastic wealth of information. That was the tool. I think that was, we contracted out with an outside provider to draft that and to format that and to send that out. And there was no one else on staff to manage the communications. I think probably that wasn't even enough at the time, but pretty quickly, as our expectations evolved, we clearly needed someone on staff to handle communications. So probably about 6 years ago, we created a new position, a new city staff position. It's the communications manager position. The person who has that position now is an Elmhurst resident. Her name is Cassandra Schreff, and she is fantastic. I mean, she has really created a number of different ways that the city is able to get out its messages. She does an electronic newsletter. Folks may have noticed the electronic signs on the underpass. She programs and has the opportunity to get information out that way. Code Red is a system that you can sign up for that provides emergency alerts to people related to things happening in the city. And I'm probably missing a handful. We, of course, still have the quarterly Front Porch newsletter. There are lots of tools available. The best way to connect to them is through the city's website, again, elmhurst.org. There is an option, a kind of logo that you can click on that says Stay Connected. And that brings up the opportunity to elect which types of notifications you want to receive. You put in your email address or your phone number, and you can receive communication directly from the city that way. And I really would encourage everyone to look at that and to sign up to receive that notification. She does a great job getting information out. Another piece that we have that is a great relatively new offering is Elmhurst Connect. So this is a system. It can be an app on your phone. You can also access Elmhurst Connect through the city's website, but it is a way to submit a request for service to the city. So I think city staff started by brainstorming what are the reasons people contact us. And they created this system so that you could submit those requests electronically. They all get logged. We can run a report to figure out what type of issues are people commenting on, how quickly did city staff respond, what was the resolution to the requested service. So this is a great tool for tracking, but it's also makes it really convenient for the public to get the attention of the city. So it can be everything from I need a new garbage toter, to my street light is out, to there's a pothole on the street, on our street, or speeding on my street. You know, it really is anything that relates to city operations. You can report a concern or a service request through this app. So that's a terrific one. And again, if you don't do apps, you can access that through the city website. So I talked a little bit already about our city manager. I'm going to skip over that one and move right into our council meetings. So the full city council, I said our meetings are on Monday, right? Every Monday, typically, unless it's a fifth Monday, but for the first 4 Mondays of every month, you can count on there being meetings at City Hall. On the first and third Mondays of each month, those are our full city council meetings. So they, I mentioned the mayor presides over those meetings. They are run by Robert's Rules of Orders. They tend to be, have a more formal feel and very structured way to run through it. It helps because again, we have a big council, so it really does help to maintain order. You can see everything that's on the agenda for those meetings by looking on board docs, and I'll get to that in just a minute. But there's an opportunity to see really everything that we look at in terms of preparing for our meetings. So our meeting is on Monday. The Thursday before that Monday meeting, by the end of the day, you can look at, and I'll show you where, you can see everything that's going to be discussed at that meeting. You can see the topic, and then you also have an opportunity to see all the supporting documents, and that's what we review in preparation for our meeting. So board docs really gives folks a great opportunity to be prepared to offer input for the business that the council is reviewing. So I mentioned the Open Meetings Act. So this is a state statute. Every public body, every meeting of the public body is subject to this Open Meetings Act. So most importantly, it says that the work of a public body has to take place in the public. You have to be meeting, you have to have a meeting that's announced in advance. The agenda has to be known in advance. The public has to be able to get into the space and be able to listen and see that business being conducted. And another interesting piece of this is that an issue that's coming to council or before the council can't be discussed by a majority of a quorum outside a public meeting. So for example, you might see in the case of the full city council, a majority of a quorum is 5 elected officials. So you may be somewhere where you see 5 elected officials. It's a social gathering, it's a community organization event. You might see 5 elected officials standing around and chatting. You can be sure that they are not talking about any business that's coming before the city. They can't. We're prohibited from doing that. That would be a violation of the Opens Meeting Act. So if they're standing around, if there are 5 of us standing around and talking, we might be talking about our Thanksgiving feast or, you know, someone's hockey game, but we will not be talking about the business before the city. So all of those discussions take place in a public meeting. A couple of exceptions to the Open Meetings Act. There are subjects that come before council that are of a more sensitive nature, and we can elect to go into a closed door session to discuss those issues. The very limited number of topics related to primarily to personnel issues, the purchase or sale of real estate, and pending or threatened litigation. So if we have an issue that falls into one of those very limited categories, we convene as a public body and then pretty quickly go into what's called executive session. And that means we're talking about business that is one of those sensitive subjects. We'll have that discussion and then we reopen the meeting to the public. We cannot vote on any of those issues. We can discuss them, but any decision happens at a public meeting. So board docs. This becomes a very familiar sight for the elected officials, but it's not always, and it actually, once you get into it, it's pretty intuitive to the public as well, to anyone who uses it. This is the tool we use to track all of our meeting agendas and materials. It becomes really almost an archive of our meetings. When I was elected, we had just started, the city had just started using board docs. Prior to that, the council agenda would be posted publicly as required, so the public could see every issue that was being discussed, but none of the supporting material. And that supporting material and the agenda would be photocopied and delivered to each of the elected officials' homes. So, a big packet would arrive with all the meeting materials, and that's what the alderman would review to prepare for the meetings. So now with board docs, all of that material is available to us without making photocopies, but really, more importantly, it's available to the public. So not only can the public see the topics that we're discussing, but you have the opportunity to access all of the background materials that are what we look at to prepare for a meeting. So you're very informed. You really have the opportunity to follow along on an issue and see all of the material that we considered in terms of coming to a decision. You can also look, this does not disappear. You can go back, you can see this over time. For past meetings, you can read the minutes of those meetings. They're all posted through board docs. So it really is a wealth of information. I'd encourage you just to poke around a little bit. You can see what's coming up. If there's an issue that interests you, you can search that term, see when it has been discussed previously. So the order of the meeting itself, the mayor calls the meeting to order. We stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. And then before we move into the business of the council, there is an opportunity for public comment. Folks can sign in. There's almost always an opportunity, even if you haven't signed in, the mayor will ask, is there anyone else who wishes to make public comment? And then anybody who wants to has up to 3 minutes to comment on anything. It can be something that is on the council agenda, an issue of a city service or a complaint about something. It truly can be anything, just a public statement that someone chooses to make. So that opportunity is available at every single one of our meetings. Aside, an important note that I always, I encourage people to come and offer comments anytime. I will kind of add to that, though, that the format of the meetings do not allow for a dialogue, right? So folks, I make a point to say that because in some cases, folks really put a lot of thought into the comments that they're delivering in that 3 minutes, and they're often issues that people care about, and very important issues that they're sharing their thoughts on. You can count on having a very attentive body, right? We're going to be watching, we're going to be listening, but we're not going to respond. So sometimes it feels, I think, very unfulfilling to the people who come and kind of pour their hearts out for a few minutes. That no one engages in a discussion or even offers a comment, agrees or disagrees, nothing. We're just quiet, but know that you're being heard. Oftentimes, I think a staff person may approach someone if it's something that's easily addressed or get a name and number and they'll follow up. In cases when that doesn't happen, there's always the opportunity to follow up directly with city staff or with any of the elected officials. There is always that opportunity to comment. Any questions? Anything that's coming in? Keep moving through.
Zoom questions currently.
Okay. I'm going to move into and start talking about our council meetings, which is really one of my favorite things to talk about. But I'll stop here and just see if anybody in the room has any questions. Nope. gonna keep moving, but jot down those questions, whatever it is that you want to get out of this, make sure you ask before we wrap up. So our council meetings are televised. We often have members of the press who come to those meetings. So if you see something on TV or if you read an article, it's often reporting on our council meetings. What folks don't often know, because our committee meetings are not televised and we often don't have the press at those meetings, but the primary discussion and debate, consideration of options, that happens at the committee level. So before an issue gets to the council for a vote by the council, it has been considered at the committee level. And that is really where the heart of the work of the council happens. So I say to everyone, if you're interested in an issue, come to committee. These meetings are also public. Every alderman is assigned to one of the 4 committees. The mayor makes those assignments. The mayor also appoints a chair and vice chair for each of the committees. And I'll walk through those committees and what they do. But one important piece that I would want you to walk away from is, if there's an issue that's important to you, come to committee. I realized pretty early on that because of the, I'd say that the level of analysis, the level of discussion and debate that happens at committee, if you wait until it's moved out of that committee and to the council, it's not too late to make changes to it, but it's almost too late. Even if you have an idea that would make the committee's conclusion better, if you wait until after the committee has finished their formulating, they're really probably not inclined to open it back up. Even if it would have made it better, it's probably good enough where they ended up. So we learn early on as aldermen, if you care about an issue, if you have thoughts, if you want to see it go in a certain direction, you give that input to the committee early on. We all serve on just one committee, so often that means we're making phone calls to the aldermen who serve on these other committees to say, look, this is the issue. This is what I'm hearing from residents. This is where I think we should go on this issue. And you get that input in very early. So it's important for us to do it. And I share that with you as well, because I think that makes the public that much more effective if they're offering that input very early on. So I mentioned we have 4 committees. The committees meet, the full council meets on the 1st and 3rd Mondays. The committees meet on the other 2 Mondays, right? So the 2nd and 4th Mondays of the month. Just like our full council meetings, you can see what the committee is going to be discussing the Thursday before each Monday meeting. So you have the opportunity to look on board docs. You can see the agenda. You can see all the supporting materials. So I'm going to jump right into these committees. The Public Works Committee. The current chair of that committee is Alderman Mike Brennan, who's in the 7th Ward. We have someone in the room here from the 7th Ward. The Public Works and Buildings Committee, as you might guess, has oversight for the maintenance of all of the city properties. So that includes City Hall, our police and fire stations, train station, history museum, parking garages. Also has oversight for streets, forestry, garbage, our water and sewer systems, and stormwater management. So for the time that I've served on city council, the first item on this agenda was typically a review of stormwater, right? That was a huge priority over the past handful of years, continues to be, but we've made so much progress that I think, we're starting to look in other directions. We still have a little bit of work to do to wrap that up, but we've made a tremendous amount of progress when it comes to stormwater management, and all of those projects came out of the Public Works and Buildings Committee. Another committee is the Public Affairs and Safety Committee. This is the committee I serve on. I'm the chair of this committee, and we focus, of course, on public safety. So it's our police and our fire, municipal licensing, so the liquor licenses, any permits for special events, the cultural activities, which include the History Museum, and the trolley. If folks have seen the trolley in previous years, and it is coming back for the holiday season. So it's been on a COVID break, but we're bringing it back for the holidays. And then we also oversee the city's communication. One quick note on our history museum. And I say this because it's one of the most fun things that we deal with in this committee, that we have the opportunity to work with. The current director of the museum is Dave Oberg, and he's been with the museum for a few years. And he is a treasure to the city, truly. He's got an all-star staff, and he loves his job. He has a passion about the work of the museum and history in general. And when you can feel it, I think, in the exhibits of the museum. They're fun, they're interesting. They really do some super neat things. So if you haven't checked out the museum lately, I would encourage you to check it out. I'll say one other thing about the museum, because I think these numbers are fairly astonishing. Pre-COVID, in a typical year, they would have about 16,000 unique visits. So they do a lot of programming. They have the one-room schoolhouse where kids would come for field trips. And then, of course, just the visits to the museum for their exhibits. 2020, the first year of COVID, they very quickly switched to virtual programming, right? Putting out a lot of things on Facebook, events on Facebook, doing a lot of taped YouTube programming. They, in 2020, had 160,000 unique visits. So they went from 16,000 to 160,000. So it, I hear those numbers, and the first time I heard it, I was like, that just can't be right, but it is. So they did an amazing pivot. I think they're going to continue a lot of that virtual programming, like the library, I think is realizing it works for people, and you can really broaden your reach. So they will continue to do that, but they're doing some really great work at our museum, bringing lots of folks to town, which is terrific. Two other committees to talk about: Finance, Council Affairs, and Administrative Services Committee. The current chair of this committee is Bob Dunn. This committee oversees our budget, our tax levy, our IT department, personnel, and finance. So they have oversight for the bonds that the city issues, for our lines of credit, and they also set our water fees. And then the last of the four committees is Development, Planning, and Zoning. The current chair is Danny Polomsky, and they oversee planning, zoning, our building and code enforcement areas, and our tax increment financing. So I mentioned that the process of moving an issue through council, the missing piece that lots of people don't realize, not the missing piece, but the piece that goes unnoticed by many people, is that committee piece. So I talked about the discussion, the debate that happens at the committee level, and then the committee generates a report, which is the conclusion, the consensus of the committee. Their recommendation is forwarded to the council in the form of a report. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. Is there a question online? Yes, I saw someone standing in the back.
Okay, good. I'm not making noise. Okay, so the first thing is, are committee meetings available on Zoom or on YouTube?
That's a great question. During the pandemic, we were operating under a completely different set of rules. So many of the aldermen were not coming to City Hall for a period of time. Of course, we were not allowed to go to City Hall. So during that time, we did switch to an online format. We did those meetings by Zoom, and there was the opportunity to at least listen to the committee meetings by phone. I don't think the public could Zoom the committee meetings, but they could tune into them by phone. As we've opened more things up, the aldermen, for the most part, are coming to all the meetings in person, and there is no longer an opportunity to listen by phone or to participate via Zoom. So our committee meetings are all in person right now. Good question.
Okay. So the next question might be better for like the zoning committee specifically. But an attendee asks, you've mentioned a few times how council members are tuned into constituents and that you value input from residents. Clearly residents are not interested in parking lots being built in residentially zoned areas. So I think might be referring to the Roberto's Ristorante issue. And there has been overwhelming residential support for hoop houses, just to name two issues. So how much weight do residents' opinions carry?
That's a great question. I'm going to, I'll talk a little bit more about that. The zoning, one of the pieces I want to get to at the end is talking about boards and commissions. And so I will talk a little bit about specifically about the Zoning and Planning Commission, which has a very prescribed role in the process of zoning applications and zoning cases. But just backing up to the more general question of how is the public input valued? I think each alderman takes pretty seriously the responsibility to do what they believe is best for the city. Certainly the public input, what people want to see, is one big factor of that. And each alderman has their own lens for backing up and thinking what is best for the city. So I do believe that the aldermen are committed to what they believe is best. It does not always coincide with what a constituent may want. And to back up, very few issues are perceived in the same way by everyone, right? So what, I often get input on an issue and I hear from people on both sides. Someone might like something, someone might be terribly opposed to the same thing. So it's, to step it back, I do think sometimes an issue is so clear to an individual about what they want to happen, but it's rare that people agree on everything, right? It typically just doesn't happen. There are different approaches, different perspectives, different experiences, and we hear different sides of issues. So it is important to realize not everyone sees an issue the same way. And so we're weighing all of that input in addition to what we believe is best for the city. Any other questions? Any questions in the room before I move into this referral process, and then I'll end up with boards and commissions? No questions. Oh, yep.
Hold on, I'm not sure if it's on there. Would it be possible in the future for the public to view or participate in committee meetings via Zoom or phone? For example, childcare issues, et cetera, making it difficult to come in person.
Yeah. I don't know the answer to that. That's certainly something that can be raised and considered. I do think COVID has shown us what's possible. And to the extent that we have the ability to make meetings more accessible, I think there is interest in doing that. So I don't know that there's been a discussion around it, certainly not a conclusion one way or the other. I talked about the way things are happening right now, but I will make a note, and that's something that I'm happy to raise. And the person who is making that suggestion, which is a good one, can certainly offer that to the city by email or by making phone calls. So thanks for that input. And right, lots of things are possible, and we know that now because of COVID. So jumping into the referral process. So how does an issue come to council? How does it move through the council? The introduction of any issue, almost all issues, shouldn't say every, but for the most part, the issues that come through city council, the process starts with what we call a referral. So it's really the introduction of an issue for consideration by council. It could be something that originates with an alderman. It could be something that originates with a resident, and they make their alderman aware of something they would like to see, a problem that they're having. But the first step is for an alderman to kind of flag that as, this is something that we need to take a closer look at. In order for a referral to be introduced to council, there needs to be at least one other alderman on that referral, right? So if somebody brings an idea to me and I think it's worthy of consideration, I have to convince one other alderman to feel the same way. And then at least two of us would be the ones to introduce that referral to the council. It can be as simple as, here's a problem that needs to be discussed. A referral can also have a fair amount of detail about what other cities do, more background on the problem, even make some suggestions of ways that problem might be addressed. So the referral is introduced to the council. It's placed on a council agenda. And the first step is really just that the council accepts that referral and assigns it to a committee. When that step happens, there is almost never discussion at the council. It really is just a matter of accepting the referral and it gets assigned to a committee. When it gets heard by the committee is at the discretion of the committee chair. It could be at the next meeting. It could be, a few weeks out to give staff time to assemble information and, kind of have enough substance to have an informed discussion at committee, or it could be not at all. Again, it's at the chair's discretion when the issue gets placed on the committee agenda. At committee, as I've mentioned, I'll say again, come to committee. It's really where the work of the council gets done. But the committee will spend, depending on the complexity of the issue, one meeting or multiple meetings over many months, whatever it takes to feel like the members of that committee are prepared to come to a conclusion. The goal of the committee discussions is always for the committee to reach consensus so that the 3 or 4 members of that committee have spent enough time thinking about the issues that they're in agreement on what action the city should take. They formulate their conclusion in a report, and that report is submitted to the council for the council's vote. If the committee is not able to reach one consensus, they do have the opportunity to move out 2 reports. They're called a minority and a majority report. Majority, of course, if it has the more members of the committee that see the issue that way. If it's a split decision, 2 and 2, then the majority report is the one that the chair supports. Those 2 reports will come to council. The first thing the council does is take a vote on which of those 2 issues, which of those 2 reports the council wants to vote on. And then there's a vote taken to approve or vote against that report. So committee generates the report. That's their recommendation, their conclusion. That report comes to the council for discussion and a vote. And then if it's something that gets approved, then 2 weeks later is the final approval for that issue. And that's in the form of a resolution or an ordinance. So there are 2 votes on every issue by council. One is a vote on the report, and the second is the vote on the ordinance or resolution. When things come to council, if you look at our agenda, you'll see there are a number of items listed under the consent agenda. And the first vote that's taken at the council meetings is on the consent agenda. So if there are issues that are more routine, non-controversial, they get placed on the consent agenda and they are read, each item is read, and then they are voted on once. And so we can approve all the issues that are on that consent agenda once. There's always the opportunity to pull any item off of the consent agenda so that it can be discussed separately. But if it moves through on the consent agenda, that means it's approved by the council without discussion. So oftentimes folks will see that and think, this was an important issue. There wasn't even any discussion. Come to committee. That's where that discussion and debate happened. So it was not something that we're rubber stamping. We didn't take a close look at. The committee did, and the council is following the committee's recommendation. So those issues go through on the consent agenda. Then separately, any issues not on the consent agenda will be introduced and discussed and voted on separately. And then that final vote is the ordinance or resolution. So the last piece, I said I wanted to touch on the boards and commissions. So the city of Elmhurst has 14 boards and commissions. A number of them are established by state statute, and their responsibilities are fairly specifically, they're specified by that state statute. In the majority of our commissions, they reflect areas of the city that either are the city priorities or that we have residents who don't all have to be residents to serve on a board or commission, but people who want to help the city do more work in those areas. So if you look at the list of our commissions, I'll pull up here, some of those issues include youth, public arts, historic preservation, architecture and building, seniors, veterans. Those are all issues where everybody who serves on these boards and commissions are volunteers. So these are people who want to volunteer their time to help move forward those issues. The one I wanted to talk a few minutes more about and relates to a question we've received earlier is the Zoning and Planning Commission. So this is a state established, we are required by the state to have a Zoning and Planning Commission. They are the first step in any request for zoning relief. So this is, I didn't say it already, all these people are volunteers. It's the mayor who appoints people to serve on these boards and commissions with the advice and consent of the council, but it's really the mayor's selections. In the case of the Zoning and Planning Commission, they are the first review of a zoning application. They establish the public record. They hold the public hearing for those zoning issues. And then the commission formulates their recommendation. So I believe there are 9 people on the Zoning and Planning Commission, and they follow a very scripted process for considering zoning relief. There are certain standards that they look at, and their job is really to understand and to consider the information that's presented and whether or not the standards for a zoning request are met. In that case, it's very clearly, they are trained to not consider public inputs. The public hearing, they hear from neighbors, they hear from the stakeholders, the applicants themselves. And certainly that public input is an important part of the process. Anybody can introduce for the record information that establishes the facts of that case. But one of the things that doesn't rate as a fact of the case is, an overall assessment of the public support. If there is a zoning request that meets the standards for that issue, then there is a responsibility to approve it. That's the way we think about most of the zoning cases. If, we talk about property rights, and again, this process is spelled out, that there are a number of conditions that need to be evaluated for each request for zoning relief. And in the case of, I'll talk specifically about Roberto's, because I do think that's probably the case the person asking talked about. The request for a parking lot, in this case, it was in a residential area. The parking is it's defined as a conditional use, which means it's allowed. We anticipated that there could be that use in that area as long as certain conditions are met. So the Zoning and Planning Commission is the first review of those conditions and whether or not those have been met. They form their conclusion and make their recommendation. That moves to the City Council Committee, the Development Planning and Zoning Committee. The committee does their review. They look closely at the commission's, the record that was established, the transcripts of their public hearing, in many cases, the transcripts of their deliberation. The committee forms its conclusion and makes its recommendation, and that recommendation comes to City Council for the final review. So in zoning cases, there are actually 3 reviews. Most issues that come to council, there are just 2 reviews, right? One at the committee, one by the full council. With zoning cases, you have that extra step of review. So the Zoning and Planning Commission, and then the Development and Planning Zoning Committee, and then the full council. Much more involved process and very much prescribed by the standards of zoning. That is the end of the presentation. So I do, both for the people who are watching from home and the people in the room, happy to answer any questions related to things I covered or unrelated. I really will be happy to do my best to answer any questions that come up. Somebody's got to have some questions. Anything you were wondering about, a certain issue that that you've read something about or want to hear more about? Happy to entertain anything. May or may not be able to answer all the questions, but I certainly will try.
We did have one Zoom question from earlier that I wanted to push till the end because it was a little more specific. What qualifications does the ideal candidate for alderman possess? This is somebody who's considering running for alderman in the future.
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Oh, sorry. So what qualifications does the ideal candidate for alderman possess? This is from someone who's considering running in the future.
There are no set qualifications. You have to live in your ward. One of the benefits of having a large council is that we have a variety of areas of expertise and kind of interests and knowledge that we bring to the job. On our council now, we have people who have been in the technology field. We have a couple of attorneys, people who are in sales, who tend to be really good communicators and presenters of their points. We have people who have been in public service. So there is no specific skill set. From my experience, the best aldermen are the ones who are open-minded, inquisitive, want to learn about issues, have a drive to serve the public, because again, a third of what we do really is that constituent service. And aside from that, it really takes a lot of time, and you really have to want to do it to make it worthwhile. So I'd say anybody who's interested, if it sounds appealing, I would encourage you to think more seriously about it. And certainly, I would be happy to discuss the job more with anyone, as I know most of the aldermen would. So yes, if it's something you're toying around with the idea of getting more involved, the boards and commissions are often a great way to get involved first. If you're just kind of thinking about it or want to understand a little bit more about how the city works, you could fill out the application to serve on a board or commission, but I would not discourage anyone from jumping right in and deciding to run for alderman.
Another question on a different topic. How often are plans, such as, for example, North York, revisited?
That's a great question. So in my time on council, we have gone back to look at the downtown plan. That's one that after a number of years passed, we went back and looked at, more broadly. We are taking another look at our comprehensive plan, which is kind of the zoning map and land use plan for the city. That's one that we'll be revisiting. The North York plan, to me, still feels fairly fresh. This was the corridor of York Street, really everything north of North Avenue. Most of that area is in a TIF district now, which is a tool that we use to support economic development. It gives us a little more flexibility in what types of projects we can support in an area and the resources to support those projects. So we did formulate a North York plan not that long ago. We also did a streetscape plan for that corridor, and that feels pretty fresh. So that's one I think, we can still pull that out and it's still very relevant. So I don't expect we'll take another look at that one anytime soon. But I'd say in general, a plan that's more than 10 years old probably doesn't have a lot of shelf life, but anything less than 10 years, I think usually is still very relevant. Any other questions online, or is that, I think I saw a question in the room. I can switch to that.
Oh, let's go ahead and do the live one.
Okay. I think I saw a hand back here. Question. That's a great question. I really love the job. It's the most fun job I've ever had. It's the lowest paying job that I've ever had, but it's the most fun. So I don't know that I could pick just one. I think I love the constituent service. So I really do enjoy hearing from residents and helping to problem solve any particular issues. But I think, I like the policy aspects of it. That was kind of my background. That's what I did for the city of Chicago. So I do like thinking of an issue and then really trying to dig into how should we address it. Being consistent, how did we do this previously? That's one of my favorite things. It takes a lot of brain power. It's a very much an internal process, but it's probably one of my favorites. Good question. Yeah. Any other questions in the room? Yes. Yeah. Yes. So on the city's website, there is an opportunity. You can click on boards and commissions and it will list them all. I think on the website, if you click on one of them, it will open up some information about what their mission is. Every commission is established in city code. In establishing a commission, the primary kind of functions, responsibility, roles and responsibilities are set in code. So you can learn a little bit about what each of the commissions does by looking at the city's website. The commissions that they all do, and you can also look at their, I believe all their commission minutes should also be accessible on the site. So you could look back and see the types of things that they've talked about in recent meetings. They each do different things. Sometimes they're organizing events. Sometimes they are, a lot of it's events. I mean, I think about the senior commission and they recognize a senior volunteer every year. What else do? They do an outstanding volunteer. They also put out some materials that are resources for seniors. The Youth Commission does a tremendous amount of programming to address issues for youth, where they bring in outside folks to speak on different issues, either directly to the students or to parents. The Youth Commission does a volunteer fair, like a job and volunteer fair to help get kids actively engaged in activities. What else? It really depends. I mean, if you have a specific commission that you're interested in, I can tell you a little bit more about what I know of that particular commission. Yeah. Yes, yes. So the application, I'm sure, is available online within that boards and commissions section. There is an opportunity, it's simpler than a job application. You can attach a resume, but it's just asking some questions about your interest, your background. There's an opportunity to say which commission in particular you're interested in, or you can say any. And then that's submitted. And then when there's an opportunity, an opening in the commissions, then you'd be able to see who's applied for those positions. And then the mayor makes a selection, and then it goes to the council for approval. Yeah. Question online? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a Zoom question. So with compensation for city positions being relatively low, what is the motivation for aldermen as well as the mayor to spend all the time required to fulfill the needs of the city? And should there be a little more compensation? Bet you'd say yes, huh?
Yeah. There's usually when we review the budget every year, there's usually one person who will at least ask the question of when was the last time that the elected officials received a raise? And I want to say it was probably about 20 years. So clearly no one does it for the compensation. That's not why anyone does it. Should that change? I'd say the system now works well. It's very cost effective for the city. And I do think they really get a lot of valuable time from the people who serve. In terms of why do people do it? I think the people who serve on the council like the work, and they also care about the community and want to give back. So I think it truly is, coming from a very good place. I love doing the work. I feel like it's really been a privilege for me. And I think that's how most people feel who serve on the council. Many communities are compensated much more. Of course, that raises the expectations. I think our community already has pretty high expectations for its elected officials that, we are responsive to them. We do get back to them and address their concerns. Usually people expect that to happen pretty quickly. So again, the expectations are high. And I think for the most part, I'd like to think that we're meeting those expectations. But certainly if you pay more, then you can expect more, right? We don't have staff, we don't have offices. We really take that compensation, which, if you have young kids, it's just enough to cover babysitting to get to meetings. So it's not for the money. We could consider paying more, and that would up the responsibilities, but I actually think we're getting pretty good service right now from our elected officials. Questions in the room? Yes, welcome. Yeah. Sure. Mhm. No. Mhm. 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 Yeah. 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 So the question was, and I'm repeating this for the folks who are joining virtually so they can hear your question. The question was about the city survey. I believe it's every 2 years. Historically, the city has done a survey where I believe it's mailed out. We might have in the last one done some opportunity to be able to fill that out online. But it's an opportunity to get input from residents on a whole bunch of issues. I mean, it tends to be a somewhat lengthy survey. I think the city has endeavored to make it more concise to really kind of tease out the most valuable, the key topics to get that input. And the question was, it's someone who's been a longtime resident and has never received the survey. So the question was, is there a way to make sure that there's input on a rotating basis from every household? I don't know how those are chosen. It's a fairly small sample, which affects the cost, right? It's not try and manage the cost by working with a small but representative sample. And I don't think we've done that. I think we're off. I think COVID kind of delayed the cycle of surveys. So it's an interesting suggestion, and I don't know how we send that out now. We do contract that out, and it's done by professionals. This is what they do, the surveys. So I expect that it's done with high quality and high care, but I don't know how the sample size is selected, but I do know it's relatively small. When it comes to the public input that we seek on our plans, somebody mentioned in a question the North York plan. We just finished a bike and pedestrian plan. We solicited public input for our train station and our downtown plan before that. When we have that type of effort to solicit public input, there tend to be a lot of ways that that's offered. So there are typically, for those specific areas, online surveys that can be filled out, in-person meetings and open houses where you can come and offer your input in person. So I think on we do a good job, and we actually receive a lot of engagement with the public when we have that type of focused opportunity for public comment. So that's another way. If you don't hit the survey, look for those calls for input when we're doing a targeted plan. Any other questions online? None online. Any more in the room? Any particular issues? Yeah.
Well, again, I kind of look at it from maybe a different perspective. For
Yeah.
the cities to actually reach out to the residents,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Several other communities collaborative.
Sure.
Library, different mail out one combined flyer.
Yeah. 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 We do, I talked earlier about the Front Porch newsletter, which is the quarterly mailing that the city does. Included in that, I think, are a lot of, there's kind of a calendar of events. And I think oftentimes that reflects not just the city's calendar of events, but lots of input from community groups, community organizations. It's really all of the community's events that can get put in that front porch newsletter in the calendar section of that. You know, I don't know that there has been conversation with, for example, the library about sharing that that mailing. The question came up, I'll just repeat quickly. The question came up, you know, should the city be coordinating with other organizations to have more robust or more frequent mailings to get that information out to residents? It's thoughtful input. I think the city's open to that. We often in our water bills provide additional information there. So I think the city has a communications manager. She's really added a whole bunch of additional channels for communication. And I mentioned earlier that you can go to the city website. There's an opportunity to click on a link called Stay Connected, and you can sign up for different methods for communication directly with the city. So if you're looking for more, to receive more from the city, I'd encourage you to check out those options that are available. Other questions? Anything else? Any issues? No. Anything online? Should we just make it a wrap? I think we're coming up for a close here, but I do just want to thank everyone for your time and attention. I encourage you to get involved, to weigh in on issues by contacting your alderman or contacting, you know, raising a service request through Elmhurst Connect. But it really is the residents that make Elmhurst great. The more of all of us who choose to get engaged, the stronger our community is. So thanks for coming tonight. Feel free to reach out to me anytime if I can answer questions or help you in any way.
Yeah, it looks like we're all out of questions online, all out of questions in person. I did just want to mention that this presentation is going to be uploaded to YouTube. It'll be up for 8 weeks. So feel free to share with your neighbors or just other people you know who live in Elmhurst, or for folks who came in late, you can watch the parts that you missed. Marti did also bring a little bit of Elmhurst related swag on the table here. So if you haven't taken that yet, feel free. And yeah, I think that's a wrap. Thanks so much for coming, everybody.